In 1613, at the remote Ipatiev monastery, a 16-year-old boy named Mikhail Romanov was elected Tsar, initiating a dynasty that would rule 1/6 of the Earth's land surface. 305 years later, in 1918, in the basement of a mansion in Yekaterinburg, a man named Tsar Nicholas II, a direct descendant of Mikhail, was executed along with his entire family. The name of that mansion? The Ipatiev House. The Romanov dynasty began at the Ipatiev monastery and ended at the Ipatiev House. History rarely loops so perfectly and forebodingly. This is more than a macabre coincidence. It is the first sign that the Romanov tragedy is more than just a political collapse. It is a Greek drama, a tragedy written by fate, sealed by blood, and guided by mysterious forces beyond our understanding. This story is about more than just a revolution. It's about a blood curse, a mad priest who seems unkillable, dark prophecies, and the greatest mystery of the 20th century. What really happened in that cellar? And did anyone survive? To understand the final tragedy, we must understand the man at its center, Tsar Nicholas II. History often portrays him as a bloodthirsty tyrant, but the truth is much more complex and sad. Nicholas was not a tyrant. He was a failed man. He was a devoted father, a loving husband who would rather take family photos, chop wood, and take walks than rule a vast empire. He was a deep fatalist. Born on the feast day of Job, a biblical figure famous for his suffering, Nicholas believed he was destined to suffer. He believed in fate, and it was his passivity, his belief that he was just an actor in a predetermined play, that made him the perfect king to lose everything. Beside him was his wife, Tsarina Alexandra Fyodorovna. Born Alex, a shy, timid German princess, she was the beloved granddaughter of Queen Victoria of England. When she married Nicholas, she abandoned Protestantism for Russian Orthodoxy, but she did not just convert, she threw herself into it. She believed in the most mystical, fanatical version of the faith. For Alexandra, every event, no matter how small, was God's will, a divine message. They were a deeply in love couple, a rarity in royal marriages. They lived in a bubble of domestic bliss, virtually cut off from the outside world. They had 4 beautiful daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. Collectively, they were known as the Atma, a group of fairy tale princesses who lived in isolation in the Alexander Palace, sheltered from the harsh realities of Russia. But there was a problem, a crucial problem. Russia did not allow women to succeed to the throne. The empire needed a male heir. 4 daughters, however lovely, were 4 political failures. The pressure was on Alexandra. She had to have a son. Her desperation opened the first door to the occult. Before the world knew Rasputin, there was someone else, a French spiritual teacher named Philippe Nizier-Vachon. He was a charlatan, a self-proclaimed mystic who convinced the Tsarina that he could use his powers to give her a son. Alexandra trusted him implicitly. He became her confidant. And then the first strange thing happened. In 1902, the Tsarina announced that she was pregnant. The empire rejoiced. Her belly grew. She wore maternity clothes. But months passed and no baby was born. It was a case of pseudocesis, a psychological phenomenon caused entirely by desperation and the influence of her master Philippe. When the truth came out, it was a terrible embarrassment for the royal family. Members of the court began to whisper that the Tsarina had lost her mind. Philippe was banished. Alexandra was humiliated, but her despair only deepened. Then, on August 12, 1904, a miracle happened. Alexandra finally gave birth to a son, Tsarevich Alexei, a beautiful, healthy, golden child. Church bells rang out across St. Petersburg. Fireworks lit up the sky. The heir was here. The dynasty was saved. The joy lasted for several weeks. One day, the newborn baby started bleeding from the navel. The wound would not heal. The blood kept oozing out without stopping. The best royal doctors in Russia were summoned. They were panic-stricken. They tried everything but could not stop the bleeding. And then the most terrible truth of all was revealed. A deadly secret that Alexandra carried through the blood of her grandmother, Queen Victoria. It was hemophilia, a blood clotting disorder, the royal disease. This is a true blood curse. It only affects men, but is inherited by women. Ironically, the Tsarina, a fanatical mother who prayed fervently for a son, was the one who passed the deadly disease on to the son she had longed for. The Romanovs' lives changed forever. The Alexander Palace became a hospital, a gilded prison. Alexei became the world's most precious and fragile child. A slight fall, a cut, a cough could mean death. The boy lived in constant pain, his joints swollen from internal bleeding. His screams echoed throughout the palace. Doctors were stumped. Early 20th century medicine had no answers. They could only watch, helpless, as the heir to the Russian Empire writhed in pain. And Alexandra, seeing her child suffer, fell into a despair that no normal person could understand. She tried doctors, they failed. She tried ordinary prayer, God did not answer. Now she was willing to try anything. It was this desperation that summoned their demons. His name was Grigory Yefimovich, but the world knew him as Rasputin, which means the rake. He was everything royalty was not. He was a Siberian peasant, a starets holy pilgrim, dressed in filthy clothes, had an unruly beard, ate with his hands, and smelled bad. But he had one thing that terrified everyone, his eyes. It was said that Rasputin's pale blue eyes had a hypnotic power. They could see right through your soul. He was introduced to the court by the black princesses, Militsa and Stana of Montenegro, friends of Alexandra who were obsessed with seances and fortune-telling. They told the Tsarina that they had found a true man of God, a simple muzhik, peasant with divine healing powers. Alexandra, who had been humiliated by the French quack, was initially skeptical. But then the crisis struck. In 1907, Alexei suffered a serious fall. He was bleeding internally and was dying. The royal doctors had given up hope and told the Tsarina to prepare for the funeral. The palace was plunged into darkness. In a final fit of desperation, Alexandra called Rasputin. The story of what happened next has become legend, but it was recorded in the diaries of eyewitnesses. Rasputin, the filthy peasant, entered the Tsarevich's luxurious chambers. He brought no medicine, performed no ritual. He simply approached the screaming boy's bed, stared at him, and laid his hands on him. According to some accounts, he simply knelt down and prayed. According to others, he whispered, "Your pain will pass. You will not die. Go to sleep." And then the Tsar miracle happened. The boy stopped screaming. His temperature dropped. And within an hour, the swelling began to go down. The next morning, when Alexei woke up, the bleeding had stopped. How? Modern historians debate. Was it the hypnotic power that calmed the child and lowered his blood pressure, allowing the clot to form? Was it Rasputin's, contrary to doctors, ban on aspirin, a new painkiller that no one knew at the time was a blood thinner and made hemophilia worse? Or was it something else? For Alexandra, the answer was clear. It was a miracle. God had sent a savior. From that moment on, Rasputin was no longer a guest. He became our friend, an indispensable member of the family. He was the only one who could save their son. And Alexandra believed that, as long as Rasputin was by their side, Alexei would live, and the dynasty would endure. She bet the survival of the Russian Empire on this mad monk. The imperial bubble was now completely sealed. Inside were the passive czar, the fanatical czarina, the isolated children, and their friend, the Siberian peasant who now had the power to dominate the Empress of Russia. And outside that bubble, a storm was brewing. The St. Petersburg aristocracy murmured in disgust. The politicians were furious. The people were starving. They saw a lecherous peasant controlling their tsarina and through her, the empire. They saw their czar, the little father of Russia, as a mere puppet pulled by a German, Alexandra, and a devil, Rasputin. In 1913, the Romanovs celebrated their 300th anniversary of rule. It was an extravagant, almost unimaginably extravagant affair. Thousands of diamonds, exquisite Fabergé eggs, gold-studded uniforms. It was a desperate attempt to assert power and eternity. But in the crowd, people did not see respect. They saw anger. And Rasputin, then at the height of his power, is said to have made a prophecy. A dark prophecy that would tie his fate to the fate of the dynasty itself. He wrote a letter to the empress. I write and leave this letter in St. Petersburg. I feel that I will leave this life before January 1st. If I am killed by ordinary murderers, especially by my Russian peasant brothers, then you, the Tsar of Russia, will have nothing to fear. Reign, and your descendants will reign for hundreds of years. But if I am killed by the nobles, then my blood will be on their hands. They will have to leave Russia. Brothers will kill brothers. And if your own relatives cause my death, then not one of your family, not one of your children will survive more than 2 years. They will be killed by the Russian people. A curse had been cast. The Russian nobility, who already hated Rasputin, now plotted to kill him. They believed that killing Rasputin was the only way to save the Tsarist regime. Little did they realize that, by that terrifying prophecy, they were sealing the death sentence for the very royal family they were trying to protect. The tragedy was entering its second act. Rasputin's dark prophecy hung over a self-destructing empire. In 1914, Russia was plunged into World War I. Tsar Nicholas II, in an act of blind patriotism, personally went to the front to command the army. It was a catastrophic mistake. He was no strategist, and his absence left a deadly power vacuum in the capital, Petrograd, the new name for St. Petersburg, changed to sound less German. And who filled that void? Tsarina Alexandra and the looming sordid shadow of her friend, Rasputin. Now public hatred exploded. Alexandra was seen as a German queen, a spy, secretly selling Russia to the enemy. And Rasputin? He was seen as her lover, a lecherous demon who controlled the country. A farce spread through Petrograd. Russia has a Tsar, a Tsarina, and a monk. The Tsar rules but does not rule. The Tsarina rules but does not rule. And the monk rules both. Government ministers came and went like pinwheels. The troops at the front were short of guns, boots, and food. But back in the capital, Rasputin was appointing his henchmen to positions of power. Fear spread among the nobility. This peasant was not just destroying the royal family's reputation, he was actively destroying Russia itself. Killing Rasputin was no longer an idea. It became a patriotic duty. And those who carried it out, exactly as the prophecy had warned, were the Tsar's own flesh and blood. At the head of the gang was Prince Felix Yusupov. Felix was a figure straight out of a novel. Husband to the Tsar's only granddaughter, Princess Irina. He was the richest man in Russia, heir to an unimaginable fortune. He was androgynous, famous for dressing in women's dresses at parties, and the center of all the decadence in Petrograd. But beneath his facade, Felix was a fervent patriot, and he believed he had been chosen by God to carry out a mission, to slay the demon haunting Russia. Joining him was Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich. This was an even more serious blow. Dmitry was a cousin of Tsar Nicholas II. He was one of the few people in the family whom Nicholas truly loved. The prophecy said, "If your own relatives cause my death." The judgment has been signed. On the night of December 29, 1916, old calendar, the plot was put into action. The plan was simple. Felix would lure Rasputin to his luxurious Moika palace with the promise of meeting the beautiful Princess Irina, whom Rasputin coveted. While he waited, Felix would treat Rasputin to cake and wine. But this was no ordinary party. The cakes, Rasputin's favorite, were laced with potassium cyanide powder. So were the glasses of Madeira wine. The amount was enough to kill 5 men. A cozy room in the basement was prepared, with a jukebox playing Yankee Doodle to mask any noise. Rasputin arrived, cheerful. He was eager to see Irina, who was actually away. Felix, trembling with anxiety, offered his friend cake. Rasputin refused. "I don't like sweets," he said. Felix was stunned. But then Rasputin changed his mind. He took one cake, then another, then another. He ate one poisoned cake after another, chewing with relish, complaining that they were a little dry. Felix, horrified, poured him a glass of poisoned Madeira. Rasputin drank it all. Then he asked for more. He drank glass after glass. And nothing happened. The Siberian peasant just sat there, belched, and started talking about spirituality, about his travels. He was completely unaffected. Felix, his face drained of color, ran upstairs where the other conspirators were waiting. "It can't be," he whispered. "It won't work." "How?" Historians try to explain. Maybe the poison was destroyed by the high temperature of the oven. Maybe Rasputin suffered from chronic gastritis, so his mucous membranes did not absorb the poison. But for Felix that night, there was only one explanation. Rasputin was not human. He was the devil. Felix took out a pistol. He went back into the basement. Rasputin was still sitting there. Felix said, "Grigory Yefimovich, look at this. Cross and pray." Rasputin turned around, and Felix fired, shooting him straight in the chest. Rasputin roared and collapsed onto the bearskin rug. Finally, he was dead. The conspirators cheered. They left the basement to plan how to dispose of the body. After a while, Felix felt uneasy. He went back to the basement alone to check. The body was still there. Felix curiously bent down and looked at the face. And then the unthinkable happened. Rasputin's left eye opened, then his right. Those crazy green eyes stared at Felix. Before Felix could scream, the poisoned corpse shot through the chest, roared like a wounded animal, and sprang to its feet. Rasputin grabbed Felix by the neck, tore off the epaulets from his shoulder, and began to strangle him. "Felix! Felix!" he shrieked. Felix, in a state of utter panic, punched and struggled, broke free and ran for his life up the stairs. "He's alive! He's alive!" The other conspirators, thinking that Felix had gone mad, ran down. They found Rasputin, not dying, but crawling on all fours up the stairs, blood pouring from his chest. He scrambled to his feet, rushed to the courtyard door, and staggered out into the snow, screaming the name of the Tsar. One of the conspirators, Ipatiev, drew his pistol and fired after him. The first shot missed, the second missed. Rasputin kept running. Finally, Ipatiev shot him, once in the back and once fatally in the head. Rasputin fell face down in the snow, motionless. But they didn't dare take any more chances. They dragged the still warm body back inside. They took an iron rod and smashed his face in. They tied his hands and feet, wrapped the body in a green curtain, and drove to the Bolshoi Petrovsky Bridge. They threw the body over the railing into a hole in the icy surface of the Neva River. They believed they had saved Russia. They were wrong. 2 days later, the police found the body. Something horrifying had been discovered. The body was frozen solid. But when doctors performed the autopsy, they discovered the final, most horrifying thing. Rasputin's hands had struggled to free themselves from the ropes. And most importantly, his lungs were filled with water. This means that after being poisoned with cyanide, shot through the chest, shot in the head, and having his face smashed, Grigory Rasputin was still alive when he was thrown into the icy river. He died of drowning. When Alexandra heard the news, she was devastated. She knew immediately what was happening. "They have killed our friend," she wrote to Nicholas. "The curse has begun." She buried Rasputin's disfigured body in a secret ceremony. She placed a holy icon on his chest. And the prophecy began to come true at a terrifying pace. Rasputin was assassinated in late December 1916. Prophecy said that the royal family would not survive more than 2 years. Just 9 weeks later, in February 1917, hell broke loose. It didn't start as a revolution. It started as a bread strike. Women in Petrograd, hungry, war-weary, and freezing, lined up in the snow to buy bread, but there was no bread. They started smashing up the shops. The Tsar at the front ordered the troops to disperse the crowd. But this time, something different happened. The soldiers, themselves war-weary peasants, refused. They did not fire on the women. Instead, they turned their guns on their officers, killed them, and joined the crowd. Within days, the entire capital had fallen to the rebels. The government collapsed. Nicholas, realizing the situation, tried to return to the capital by imperial train. But it was too late. Railway workers had blocked the tracks. The imperial train, a symbol of absolute power, was forced to stop at a remote station called Pskov. Generals and politicians came to see him on the ship. They did not come to beg. They came to demand. They said to him, "Your Majesty, to save Russia, you must abdicate." Nicholas, the man who believed in fate, who had always believed he was born to suffer, did not argue. He was tired. He just wanted to return to his family. On March 2, 1917, in a stranded train car, Tsar Nicholas II, ruler of 1/6 of the earth, took a pencil and signed the abdication document. The 304-year Romanov dynasty ended, not with a great battle, but with a shaky stroke of a pencil. Rasputin's prophecy was coming true. If I am killed by your relatives, not one of your family will survive. The Romanovs were no longer royals. They were citizen Romanovs. They were placed under house arrest in the Alexander Palace, where they lived in their own isolated bubble. They were prisoners in their own home. And now they were no longer in the hands of God or in the hands of the nobles. They were in the hands of the Russian people, the people who, Rasputin had warned, would be their killers. The 2-year timer has started counting down. Life inside the House of Special Purpose, the Ipatiev house, is a nightmare of boredom, punctuated by petty horrors. Yakov Yurovsky, the new commandant, is a heartless executioner. He runs the prison with iron discipline. The windows were whitewashed, blocking out all direct sunlight and any view of the outside world. Double-height wooden fences ensured no one could see in and no one could escape. The air was stagnant, heavy with the smell of sweat, the guards' cheap cigarettes, and the stench of the toilets they were only allowed to use at certain times. The Romanov family, the last 7 of the great dynasty, along with 4 loyal attendants, Dr. Botkin, maid Demidova, cook Haritonov, and valet Trupp, were crammed into several rooms. They tried to maintain a warped normality. Nicholas read historical works aloud to the family. The 4 grand duchesses mended clothes, played cards, and tried to comfort their younger brother Alexei, who was still severely weakened from the bleeding. But Alexandra knew this was no ordinary captivity. She knew they were in an enemy lair. Evidence of her spiritual warfare remained. On the wall above her and Alexei's bed, she had drawn a symbol in pencil, the swastika. For her, it was a talisman, a symbol of eternity and divine protection, learned from Rasputin. She was trying to use ancient magic against an army of pagans. Yurovsky, a hard-line Bolshevik, saw the symbol. He might have scoffed at it as a superstition, but he did not realize that Alexandra and her daughters were harboring another secret, a much more mysterious physical form of protection. Before leaving Tobolsk, knowing they would likely be separated or robbed, Alexandra and her daughters made a desperate move. They took out their personal treasures, chains of diamonds, pearls, rubies, and sapphires. But they did not hide them in suitcases. They spent weeks secretly sewing hundreds of gemstones, weighing more than 1.5 kilograms in total, into special corsets and clothing linings. This was more than just a matter of hiding wealth. For Alexandra, it had mystical significance. These gems, many of which had been blessed by Rasputin, were more than just wealth. They were talismans. She was creating a kind of spiritual armor for her daughters. She believed that the sacred sparkle of the diamonds, sewn close to their skin, would protect them from the clutches of evil, from the hands of the Bolsheviks. They wore these heavy, jeweled garments almost all the time. The guards, who were rough workers and peasants, had no idea that the young women they were mocking were wearing enormous wealth. They had no idea that Alexandra's talisman would soon turn a quick execution into a chaotic scene of carnage. Their time was running out. Rasputin's prophecy that they would be killed by the Russian people was coming to an end. In early July 1918, another force was approaching Yekaterinburg. The White Army, loyal to the Tsar, supported by Czechoslovakian troops, was fighting fiercely to rescue the royal family. For the Bolsheviks in Moscow, this was a potential disaster. If Nicholas II were rescued, he would become a living banner, a powerful symbol against which to rally all anti-Bolshevik forces. The public trial that Lenin had promised was now too dangerous and time-consuming. A secret telegram was sent from Moscow to Yekaterinburg. Its exact contents remain a subject of historical debate, but the final order from the Euro-Soviet is clear. Yakov Yurovsky was ordered to liquidate the entire Romanov family. No survivors, no witnesses, no bodies left to be venerated. The night of July 16th, early morning of July 17th, 1918, less than 2 years after Rasputin's death. Around 1:30 a.m., Yurovsky woke Dr. Botkin. He lied calmly. "The situation in the city is very unstable," he said. "The Whites are approaching. We have to move the families to the basement for your safety, in case of stray bullets." The Romanovs, accustomed to false alarms and sudden movements, wearily accepted. It took them about 40 minutes to get dressed. Alexandra and her daughters wore their special diamond armor under their dresses. Nicholas carried Alexei, who was still unable to walk. Tsarina Alexandra followed. The 4 Grand Duchesses, Olga, 22, Tatiana, 19, and Anastasia, 17, accompanied them. Anastasia, the mischievous girl, brought her beloved puppy, Jemmy. 4 of their loyal servants also followed, 11 in all. They were led through the courtyard, down a narrow staircase, and into a small, empty basement room. The room had a single barred window. There was no furniture. Alexandra complained, "There are no chairs. Can't we sit?" Yurovsky, with a ghastly politeness, had 3 chairs brought in. Alexandra sat down. Nicholas made Alexei sit in another. Dr. Botkin stood against the wall. The rest stood in a small group, confused and frightened. They waited. They thought they were waiting for a truck to come and take them away. Yurovsky left the room. A moment later, he returned. Following him was a full firing squad, 11 men armed with pistols and rifles, filling the small room. Yurovsky stepped forward and pulled out a sheet of paper. He read quickly, his voice even. "Nikolai Alexandrovich, considering the fact that your relatives in Europe continue to attack Soviet Russia, the Presidium of the Euro-Region Soviet has decided to shoot you." Nicholas, who had never believed this would happen, turned to look at his family, then back at Yurovsky, stammering, "What? What?" Alexandra and Olga tried to make the sign of the cross. Yurovsky did not repeat. He drew his pistol. "Hey!" he shouted. He pointed the gun straight at Nicholas's chest and fired. The Tsar died instantly, falling down. That was the signal. The firing squad opened fire. The small 5-by-6-meter room exploded with gunfire, screams, thick gunpowder smoke, and the smell of blood. The soldiers had been assigned targets in advance. But then, something inexplicable happened. Nicholas, Alexandra, Dr. Botkin, and the male attendants all fell. But the Grand Duchesses remained standing. Their screams echoed through the smoke. The soldiers, panicking, continued to shoot at their chests, but the bullets seemed to ricochet. The soldiers, superstitious peasants, were shocked. In the smoke, they saw the princesses, covered in plaster dust and blood, still alive, screaming and moving. They thought the Tsar's family were evil. They thought they were protected by a supernatural force. It was Alexandra's talisman. The diamond corsets acted as crude bulletproof vests, deflecting the first bullets, turning an execution into a massacre. The soldiers lost all composure. Their commander, Ermakov, in a drunken frenzy, pulled a bayonet from his rifle and began stabbing. Others pulled out pistols and fired indiscriminately. The massacre turned chaotic. They shot the girls in the head at close range. Tatiana was shot in the back of the head. Olga and Maria were stabbed and shot. Anna Demidova, the maid, survived the first volley of bullets and used a pillow, also filled with jewels, to defend herself before being bayoneted to death. Alexei, who died in his chair after the first volley, was still shot twice more in the head by Yurovsky just to be sure. The last to move was Anastasia. The 17-year-old girl was leaning against the wall, covering her head and screaming. Ermakov tried to stab her with his bayonet, but it did not penetrate the diamond. Other soldiers finished her off with shots to the head. The little dog, Jimmy, was also beaten to death with rifle butts. Within 20 minutes, the cellar was silent, except for the groans of the dying and the strong smell of gunpowder. 11 bodies lay piled in a pool of blood. Rasputin's prophecy had been fulfilled. Yurovsky's work had only just begun. Now he had to make these 11 bodies disappear. The bodies were wrapped in bed sheets, thrown onto a truck, and taken to a remote forest outside Yekaterinburg, where an abandoned mine called Ganina Yama is located. The disposal was a disaster. The truck got stuck. The plan to dump the bodies down the mine failed when they discovered the shaft was too shallow. Yurovsky, desperate, ordered his men to strip the bodies. This is when they discovered the diamond armor, which both amazed and angered them. They tried to destroy the bodies. They used axes to chop them up. They poured 180 liters of sulfuric acid on them. They lit a huge fire. But the 11 bodies did not disappear easily. Realizing that Ganina Yama was too exposed, Yurovsky decided to move them again. But he made one last move, one that would create the greatest mystery of the 20th century. To fool anyone who might find the mass grave, he separated the two smallest bodies, Alexei and one of the Grand Duchesses, believed to be Maria or Anastasia, from the main group. He burned these two bodies separately and buried them in a second, secret grave a few miles away, under an old dirt road, the Koptiaki Road. The remaining 9 bodies were hastily buried in a shallow mass grave. A few days later, the White Army captured Yekaterinburg. They found the Ipatiev house. They found the cellar, its walls riddled with bullet and bayonet holes. They found Alexandra's swastika. They found Anastasia's dog. They found the remains of a fire at Ganina Yama. But they did not find the bodies. The Soviet government lied. They announced that only Nicholas was executed. His family was safe. And because the bodies disappeared, because there was a cover-up, the legend was born. The legend that not all of them died. The legend that one escaped. That legend centers on one name, Anastasia. Over the decades, women claiming to be Anastasia have emerged around the world. The most famous is Anna Anderson, a woman rescued from a Berlin canal who had incredible knowledge of the inner life of the royal family. She fought in German courts for decades to be recognized. The whole world was captivated. Could it be possible that a 17-year-old girl, protected by her mother's diamond armor, had survived the Ganza carnage and escaped? The Anastasia legend became one of the greatest stories of the 20th century. It is a reverse fairy tale, a princess who does not find her prince but tries to regain her lost identity. The mystery was only solved after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1991, the first mass grave was found, based on Yurovsky's own secret notes. DNA tests were performed. They found Nicholas, Alexandra, Olga, Tatiana, and 3 attendants. But just as Yurovsky had planned, 2 bodies were missing, Alexei and a Grand Duchess. The mystery continues. Anastasia may have escaped. It wasn't until 2007 that amateur archaeologists found a second burned grave beneath Koptiaki Street. They found 44 broken bones. International DNA tests have indisputably confirmed it. It is Alexei Romanov and Grand Duchess Maria. The circle has finally closed. No one escaped. No mystery. Just a brutal massacre and a 90-year cover-up. The Romanov dynasty, which began at the Ipatiev monastery, ended forever in the basement of the Ipatiev house. The blood curse of hemophilia, the mystical rise of Rasputin, and the prophecy of his death, all were cruelly fulfilled, sealed not by magic, but by bullets, bayonets, acid, and fire.